Mr. Charlie Phillips, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you very much for joining us again today. We just talked, what was it, a week ago to get ready for this interview. My mind's been buzzing ever since.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me to join you.
Yeah. Well, I met you through Doug,
Mhm.
Doug Haig, which many of our listeners will know through AWI. And
Yeah.
just as we get started here, Charlie, so that the audience understands and knows who you are if they haven't met you before or seen you at one of the AWI events, who the heck are you? And why are you talking to this group of woodworkers around the world?
Well, so currently my role is I am the program director. I'm a assistant professor at Pittsburg State University in the Architectural Manufacturing Management and Technology program. So I've been here for 10 years. We're kind of unique in the program that we are the only 4-year architectural manufacturing program in the country. But prior to this role, I was in the industry. My background in the high-end residential and commercial millwork, and part of that time I served as a production supervisor, shop foreman, whatever title you want to call that. So,
Well, that's the title we want to talk to because today,
okay.
the foreman, which is a big question for so many owners.
Yeah.
What size of shops did you work in, Charlie?
Well, I worked, I would call medium-sized shops. At our peak, we were probably about 40 employees at our peak. So, depending on who you're talking to and comparing, and I would say a majority of the time we were somewhere in the neighborhood of around 20.
Yeah, those are good size medium shops. A lot of guys listening here have 2, 5, maybe 11, 12 employees, and they're on a growth path, which is why they're listening to the show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I would say that if I had my preference, the smaller size as a foreman would be probably a little easier to handle on a day-to-day basis. So,
Yeah.
I'll admit those larger times it was days were longer and the headaches were bigger. So
Yeah. Well, you know what we say is you're just adding zeros to the problems and the questions.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now I just mentioned cats because, herding people or managing people is like herding cats. For people who are listening to this as an audio, it's a video as well. You can see it on YouTube. And for those of you watching it on YouTube, you're seeing the same thing as me. You got a lot of gorillas in the background for a guy in the woodworking industry.
Well, that just happens to be that Pittsburg State, which not only do I teach at, I'm also an alumni.
Yeah.
We just happen to be the gorillas. So many people see the split face and recognize that the Pitt State Gorilla, and we have a lot of alumni, hopefully, that are listening, but in the woodworking field. But then you see gorillas behind me, and that's some of the artwork of one of my former students who got very creative on a CNC router and took that to the next level. And so I've got plastic gorillas, I've got concrete gorillas, and wooden gorillas. So always nice to showcase the work of our students.
That is, yeah. So those are all CNC work there, or are they hand carved?
Well, what you see on my back shelves are actually molds that they started off with CNC work and then took that next process to creating some other things. So it all started with a wood or an MDF wood blank, and it progressed into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gorillas, it seems like. So
Well, hey, when somebody's passionate about something, they just can't help but do. And obviously those are the students that are passionate.
Absolutely. And they make it a much more joy to instruct when somebody has that passion.
Yeah. Well, let's use that passion idea and switch over to this talk about the foreman, because the reason I asked you on the show, and Doug Haig from the AWI suggested you, so thanks to Doug if Doug's listening, is I get questions from listeners. And this foreman question keeps coming up. We had an episode maybe a year ago, a guy named Rick Patak. He's a foreman as well, who's now in industry, just like yourself, like a senior guy who started as a cabinet maker, became a foreman. That episode still gets lots of listens. People are still interested in that, but people want more info on the foreman. When am I ready for one? How do I find one? When I find one, how do I train and support them? What kind of person should they be? It's a big gorilla. We're trying to hug gorilla here. So
yeah,
tell me a little bit about, in your experience, what makes let's just talk about what makes a good foreman, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Okay. Yeah, I was say just in what your intro there, I could start answering questions. But yeah, and granted, this is strictly my opinion and what I have found that I feel works best, what worked best in our shop, and then what has worked, what I've seen. Having the opportunity to tour lots of facilities in a year, not necessarily this year, but in most years. But go out and see what works. What makes that great foreman. I think personally that one of the first things is they have to have that dedication or that passion. A foreman is not someone who's going to work 8 to 5, and as soon as the bell goes off, leaves. Now, granted, you may be able to do that 1 or 2 days a week, maybe if you're lucky when things aren't busy. But a foreman really has to be that person who is fully dedicated to that company. When we were talking and a week ago, my personal opinion was I was the guy who unlocked the door and I was the guy who shut the lights off. Now, granted, that didn't work every day, and not everybody has that opportunity to do that depending on how that shop is ran and set up. But I felt like it was my responsibility to know what was going on and have that things ready. Now, granted, I had some great guys that I work with that in some cases didn't need me to sit there and do that for them. But that was my mentality, and I felt I had a better grasp on things when I was that first guy in the door and the last guy to leave, because hopefully there was no questions that I at least did not have some answer to. May not had a solution necessarily, but I was aware of what was going on, and that's a big role of what that foreman does.
Yeah, it's your team, right? I mean, it's your team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's play a game for a second and say that you're not leaving Pitt State, but let's just say you went into another shop and you started off. How would you build the team from scratch, in a way that you think would be the best for the end product and for the company and for everybody working there? How'd you build that culture?
Well, I'm definitely a lead by example kind of guy, and I still do that. I guess I could call myself a foreman or a whatever here at the school. I think it would be rather difficult just to walk into a shop and take over that foreman role as a new person to that facility, that culture. There are many cases where sometimes you need new blood in there, but being that person, that foreman is, in my opinion, sometimes that go-to guy or that in-between guy between the shop and the office side. And sometimes, there's already a good connection. But other cases there may not necessarily be. And so that foreman has to be the guy who kind of navigates those waters and make sure that both sides are on the same team.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced some of that, and I've seen that where you have guys that are constantly butting heads, and one side's trying to do something different and they're doing things because in spite of what the others do. And that doesn't help anybody out. So you need that person that both sides respect.
Yeah.
The guys in the shop will look up to and understand what they're saying and respect that. But the same thing goes for the engineers, for the estimators, the project manager side, is that they know they can come and talk to you and say, hey, this is what needs to be done. This is what the customer's wanting, whatever it may be. These are the deadlines that they can then take, that you're going to take that back to the guys in the shop and they're going to listen to you and things are going to get done what needs to get done. So
foreman's an interesting place because it's a delicate dance between what the office needs and they're pushing down to the floor and then the floor is receiving that work, but they have needs as well. And, sometimes things can't be done or can't be done the way that, they're still going to get done, but the floor knows, hey, there's a better way to do it than maybe engineering sent down. So the foreman has the role of communicating that back and forth in a respectful way to say, hey, look, we're going to do it, but I think this might be the way to.
And that, I think that's, obviously experience is going to come into that. And if you can, I won't say, we all seem like we've probably experienced, if we've been in this industry for very long, that there's sometimes, shops that have a worker that's been there for quite some time that may not be as easy to get along with, more hard-headed, but they have a wealth of knowledge. But, sometimes nobody wants to listen to them because they are so stubborn and hard to work with. But having somebody that hopefully can communicate with that and take that wealth of knowledge and take it to maybe a young engineer or vice versa, you want to make sure that you have somebody that can work with both of those people without creating, oh, sorry about that, create an environment where, both sides understand each other and have a great working relationship, because both sides are valuable in that. You can't just say, well, the shop knows what's going on, they should run it, or vice versa.
So what I'm hearing from you a lot is that the role of a foreman is a communicator.
Absolutely. Because, and it, depending on the size of the shop, it may be really simple for a project manager, engineer to look out and see what's going on, or have that day-to-day interaction, because, it's a group of 5-6 guys, they take breaks together. So there's always that communication. Well, as you progress up in size, that becomes more difficult to do. Owners, project managers may not be in the shop as much because they're out, working on jobs, working with customers, and whatever that may be. So you need somebody that when they ask, well, where are we at, that they can tell you exactly where they're at, because, that's critical to schedules. It's critical to future jobs down the road. So communication is absolutely key. But with that, not only are you just the communicator, but you have to be someone that both sides, can trust. You can tell people things, but if you don't follow through with that and what you say and your actions, then you're not going to get anywhere as well.
Let me flip this around, because we're speaking to the owners of shops here.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Shops, and they're trying to grow and making sure they're profitable and putting out really good products that they're proud of. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I see as an outsider is often the communication problem is owner to foreman. Not necessarily, we all wear the blame. If we're all taking responsibility, we can all do better. But one of the gaps that I see is where an owner says, I don't have time for a bunch of meetings. He should know what to do. I'm just going to push him stuff. He'll figure it out. But then the expectations are really high on the other side, and it leads to a little bit of frustration.
Absolutely. And I've seen that. I probably experienced some of that, where that, they should know what to do. Well, unfortunately, we can't all be mind readers. And so that communication, and even if it's, having weekly meetings, and I still do that here, we have our little powwows that we get together and we communicate. And that communication is key. But as far as the owner goes, communicating is part of that, but listening is also part of that, and understanding, because you can have a meeting, and if they say, well, we're having issues with this piece of equipment, this system, or what, this method of construction is not working, it can't go into one ear and out the other. And so there has to be not only the communication side, but it also has to be a give and take. If you're trusting someone to run your shop, you need to be able to trust that person to possibly, give you feedback, give you possible solutions to issues that you're having. Vice versa, if we're having, if that owner says, well, we're having problems with this, or what can, we need to change this, or you guys need to do this, it needs to work both ways.
Yeah. If let's just say, for example, we've got a 10-man shop, and I say man, I mean person. People.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we've got a 10-man shop, and we've got an owner. How often should that owner be talking to, like having a real in-depth private conversation with the foreman?
I'd say once a day on a 10-man shop.
Yeah.
I would say once a day. And granted, that doesn't happen all the time. There is exceptions, but on a shop that is that small, I would think it would be much easier to have a little bit more intimate relationship versus a shop that's 20 to 40 to 50 people. And even if it's not a face-to-face, call, check in, because in many cases, if they're left alone, they're going to go off and start to do their own thing. Even if you think they should be doing what they want to do, it's really simple. It's really easy if there's not kind of that direction from both sides to keep the direction that you really have in mind. So, if you're wanting specific things to be done, obviously you're hiring a foreman to take over those day-to-day things, but there should be some communication. I don't care whether it's a 3-minute phone call, just saying, hey, where are we at? How's things going? What do you think? Just so that they, that everybody's in the loop.
So people that have heard the show before have heard me use this analogy. Imagine your favorite sports team. You crack your favorite beverage, you sit in your most comfortable couch, you sit down, and the on-field announcer says, hey, for tonight's game, there will be no coaching staff. The team is going to take to the field on their own. We're going to see how it goes. They should be fine. The other team has their GM, their coaching staff. The ownership is in the executive suites. The team is there. The on-field coaching staff is there. Who's going to win that game? The team that has their management team and communication in place, or the team that's just left on their own to wander?
Well, I think depending on the skill level of the players, they may do good till about the second, third inning, and then it may or they may win the first game, right? They may win 2 or 3 games. But as human nature, we take the path of least resistance, right? And so some cases we tend to do things that are a little bit easier. We let things slip, and we need that checks and balances. And it works both ways, whether it's a foreman to the owner to the foreman. I think in many cases we need that checks and balances, because they may see something that we're not seeing because we're looking at it every day, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And so, whether it's saying, hey, you're not giving us enough time, or whatever it may be, whether it's materials, whether it's jobs, whether it's personnel, all of those things, there has to be communication. And, if you're wanting to give that person certain authority, make sure that you hand that authority over to them, not say, well, you're supposed to take care of this, but yet you really don't have that. I've seen some cases of that as well, where the foreman may be the fall guy, but it's really not his decision. And sometimes, especially with personnel issues.
Well, it's, the reason to have a meeting is not to visit. It's for communication and accountability. And that accountability goes both ways.
Absolutely.
So many very specific, just think about how many products are available in paneling now, especially if you're doing some architectural millwork type application. Paneling's coming from Germany. We need to get that lined up with something else that has to get done first. And then you throw architects in, and they have a whole other idea of what they want or what's available. And that communication is absolutely key. And you go along the line of materials. If let's say you're using new materials on a project, it's really important that maybe that owner knows what's going on. They've met with the client, they've met with an architect, designer, whatever it may be. And if they don't kind of give heads up to the guys coming, hey, this is what we're working on. This is what to be expected. There could be issues. They may not be handling it right. They may not be whatever. And then they're basically setting themselves up for failure. So one of the takeaways I'm picking up from you is that communication, all directions, is critical for foreman to be successful in their role. Foreman's got to be a good communicator. The owner or leadership, let's say the office team to the foreman has to be clear. Foreman to the crew has to be clear. Let's talk about the foreman themselves, because some of the people listening here haven't hired a foreman, or maybe they're going to ask their foreman to listen to this episode. Yeah. There's something called the Carnegie Triangle, which you may have heard of, and it's a triangle, and each of those peaks there's a definition. One of them is skill, one of them is attitude, and one of them is knowledge. Between those 3 things, skills, attitude, or knowledge, which one do you think is most important?
Attitude.
I didn't even finish the question. Attitude. Yeah.
I think the attitude, but your skill and your knowledge comes, and you could probably flip-flop any 3 of those, really. But your attitude, it's magnetic, right? If you're always if you're a negative person, people will attract to that. And so attitude, you can maintain a really good positive attitude when things are crappy and still keep people upbeat and going. Vice versa, from both sides. So I think you got to have the attitude that you want to succeed. Maintaining that positive attitude is part of that. Obviously, we all have our bad days and things can go wrong, and people, I've met some great foremen who I wouldn't say that we're the nicest people in the world, but as a role, their attitude was, we need to get the job done. They were focused on the end goal.
Yeah.
And I've met some guys who were super nice, and they were, but their goal wasn't the same. They were more focused on being nice, but their attitude needs to be that you're there to perform that job and do the best that you can for that company, not the owner, not the shop guys, the company.
Yeah. That's actually a very deep comment you just made, Charlie, because all of us are working for the company. Exactly. The owner thinks they are the company, and I'm here to remind all of you owners out there, you're not the company. You work for the company. It would take a lot of work with somebody like me before you got to the point where you're an investor, and I'd be happy to do the work with you, but where you become an investor who's operating the company versus somebody working in the company. It's quite a journey to get there.
The only time that happens is when you're a one-man show.
Well, none of it. Yeah.
And that is it. If there's more than one person in that facility, then the owner is still not the only one there. And so that's where that foreman, attitude has to be that you're doing what's best for the company. So it works both ways. Your skill and your knowledge. We talked about, well, do they, how do you hire that and that trust factor between both sides? And it can be very difficult, especially maybe sometimes for older, very knowledgeable, very skilled craftsmen that are maybe somewhat set in their ways, to have a new person come in and start giving them direct, some sort of directive or overseeing what they do. And not saying that it's not possible to bring that person in, but it takes a very, very special attitude and character to be able to do that. And so many cases, I think that foreman person has to have a little background in the facility, whether it's, wherever it may be, has to have a little bit of background in that, working for that company for at least I would say a minimum of 1 year. Now, take it or leave out, that can be, there's a lot of ifs and ands and what about this, but they have to have kind of built up that respect where people know that person does know what they're talking about. They, if you say, well, you just got to do this faster. Well, it's easy for you to say that because you're the one in charge, but you don't know how to do it. Well, if you've been that person who's maybe gone through the paces, and, especially somebody who's been there for more than a year and has worked in numerous areas, regardless, what they're manufacturing, but has worked more than one area, not just necessarily in the office, but has done some stuff in the shop side of it. They're going to want to have a better understanding of how the company works and possibly what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are. But hopefully in that time period too, they're going to have built up the trust and the respect. Yeah. That's another key word, is respect. You don't have to like somebody, but you can still respect them.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in employees and owners and everything else. But they've got to build up that respect. And that's not something that's going to, somebody new is going to walk through the door and automatically have everybody's respect. An owner can love a person to death, but if they bring somebody new in and they throw him out there and all of a sudden, now we have a new guy that we're supposed to answer to, there's already going to be a chip on some shoulders of people. And that's just nature. And I've seen that in shop after shop after shop.
Yeah.
That's just not going to happen. And so building that confidence in what the employees know and that person, that leader for them, because that shop foreman is kind of the liaison for the shop guys, but they've got to have that respect for that. Having that skill and having that knowledge is what leads to that respect in some aspects. So I was always, a person that I lead by example. And so I had, especially at our smaller time in my experiences, there was days I stepped in and said, okay, we're running behind, we're short a person today or whatever it may be. I stepped in and worked. And so, at that time I wasn't a production supervisor or a foreman. I was just another guy building cabinets, machining doors,
and you're
installing cabinets, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But that's where that knowledge and skill level come in. And then also they know that the guy that's leading us is also not afraid to get in there and get dirty and sweat as well.
So Charlie, one of the things that happens, you're at the point where you're ready to hire a foreman and you want them to come in, and the minute they hit the floor, you expect them to start running and things are going to change. And this is actually a really common issue in all sorts of businesses when you have another layer of management. And, I had to learn this the hard way, and I failed a whole bunch of times before I figured it out. It takes a lot of self-confidence, but when you step into a leadership role, quite often the best thing to do is nothing for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Just sit back and observe. Let it run the way it's running. take your notes, get to know people, find out what's going on, but don't start poking your nose in and making changes until you have seen the operations. To your point, if I was just hired into a new shop, I didn't get promoted from being a senior benchman into production supervisor or foreman, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to tell the owner, look, for 2 weeks, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to observe. I'm going to record things, and we're going to think about the whole system, and then we're going to act. And that gives people time to go, okay, well, this guy's, he's not just a hothead,
Exactly.
right? Taking a look at the operations, and then you can prioritize what needs to be done. You can say, I understand why this gets done this way because in order to do this, we have to do that. In order to do that, we have to do that first. And because we can't do the other thing, we couldn't do item that's of most importance. So there's always observations that can be made before actions are taken.
Absolutely. You can't make a change if you don't know what's wrong or what needs to be changed. So So absolutely.
Chill out and have and owners listening understand that your foreman might need to take some time to just make observations before changes are made. They're not just going to, you're changing the culture of a team, just like it would be in a professional sports team or somewhere else. When you're changing the culture, it takes time. Charlie, for those of you who are watching, Charlie's lights keeps going out because
we're energy efficient here, and so if I'm not moving around enough that we go out. So can't control that, but we'll just I just need to wave around a little bit more, and we need to do more.
You got to
activities.
Wave your hands and
that's typically it seemed like my nature, and I usually don't sit for long, so. I usually never have that problem where I'm up and down and going from one activity to the next. So happened more, I think, than it's happened the last week while we're sitting here.
So we covered off a lot of things on the foreman. We talked about attitude, skills, knowledge. We talked about communication. If you could create the perfect foreman, and again, gender neutral, doesn't matter. If you could create the perfect foreman, how would we see them or recognize them?
Oh my. Well, that's pretty, how would we recognize them? Well, I would say in most cases, they're going to be the person that, in walking through the shop, they're definitely going to be the guy you probably see moving around more. A guy and like I said, there was days that I sat in one spot and did the same activity over and over just because it needed to be done. But as a rule, if you watch that person or you were able to track where they went in a day, they're going to be the guy that's going around. That doesn't mean that they have to check in with every person every day. If you've got a good team, you shouldn't have to be. But just making the rounds, making sure everything is sometimes attention is the biggest motivator. It doesn't have to be positive or negative. It's just attention. If you walk in and as simple as you walk up and say, hey, how was your weekend? Same thing happens with my students. Communication, at least, it shows that they're being paid attention to and noticed.
Yeah.
And so, a foreman, if they're walking through and just, understanding your employees and knowing your employees, that's going to be a big thing. So you may not necessarily see it if you're in that shop for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, because they may be addressing a specific problem. But if you were to track that person around that shop, they're probably going to be that person that's walked from both ends of the shop about every, before break, after break, and probably made a trip up to the office or into the office area. And they're going to know what's going on. They're also probably going to be that person, if you go up and you talk to them, they're probably not going to be able to sit and talk to you for 2 hours. They're going to be the guy that's going to say, hey, nice talking to you. I need to get back to whatever I'm working on. At least that's my experience. That's kind of the way I was, because you've got so many different irons in the fire that if you're really in that position, in most cases, like you said, you may be having to help load the truck. You may be having to do maintenance. You may be doing all these things. So they have to be that guy that's willing to do that and able and a quick thinker in that aspect. They may not necessarily know how to do everything, but they have a good idea of finding that person who can, or being able to solve those problems.
Yeah.
So they're going to be the person too that can, have probably in some cases I've seen that they have a better understanding of every piece of equipment in that facility. I mean, I've seen some great owners that really knew and were, and then I've seen some that are maybe have a little bit more back seat and how that operation ran. And that's not necessarily bad. I don't want to come off as that, that they shouldn't. But in most cases, especially on the shop floor, they know that entire process of what is happening. In many cases, can tell you about all the employees as well.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who deal with them. Even if they're not necessarily the ones, if a facility has an HR person and things like that, that shop foreman is still the person who tends to deal with them every day. They, and I've faced this situation where people have hired and then said, well, here you go. He's your problem now, or she, whatever, or her problem, he or she is your problem now.
Yeah.
And I think that also plays into the role of the supervisor, is not necessarily having to be that person, because in many cases you don't have that time, but at least having that involvement, saying, hey, we're going to be hiring some people, especially in the smaller shops. If you've got a much larger shop and maybe that's broken down, but if you have a very small shop, especially when those roles where what those individuals are doing kind of shifts depending on what is happening and where that job may be, there's going to be a lot more interaction going on. And so they do need to have a good understanding of who they're bringing in and what their abilities are and what they can do, because I've been in that situation where owner hires somebody and then now they're your problem. And you've got to then figure out, well, what do they know? What do they don't know? What parts are they on? And honestly, I had that happen several times and sat down and had that communication and say, listen, if I had to spend the whole day training that person on this particular thing that he was supposedly, or she was supposedly already knew how to do, well, we're costing everybody time and money here. So, I'm not saying that foreman has to be involved in the interview process or some of that, but they at least need to be involved. And there was many cases that I actually was, especially just making sure that person was fitting the need for what they were wanting. In some cases it didn't matter, but at least being that communication, because just saying, hey, by the way, tomorrow you got a new employee showing up, that really sat wrong with me personally, just because it threw, I'm a planner, and the fact that what I'm doing that day, I already kind of have that laid out, and all of a sudden you're throwing somebody in your lap. Those are days that my attitude probably wasn't the best when things like that happen. And so once again, that communication, it just leads back to that communication. And the smaller the shop, the more intimate that's going to be. And hopefully the bigger role that foreman's going to play in that. Obviously, the bigger the company, you may have other people hired to do that, or that's more of their responsibility. Sure. But the end of the thing, it just all still goes back to that foreman's going to be the one that has to deal with it out on the floor.
Yeah. Well, you've drawn a dark rectangle around the foreman production manager, which is good. I mean, you've made it bold, and I hope everybody listening understands it's a complex question. It's not an easy one that Charlie and I are taking on right now. A foreman's different in every shop, and every shop does different things. You might
absolutely
be a furniture shop, and you're different than a production cabinetry shop. And again, if you make custom surfboards or wine racks, it's a different thing again. It's every mix of people is different,
and those people aren't necessarily interchangeable. Sometimes your best shop foreman, in a specific situation, maybe somebody that you raised up from that guy you hired as a bench guy. And I've seen that. That product that you're producing, that shop through and through.
Yeah.
And that person, unfortunately, is probably indispensable, but he knows every piece of equipment he has. You know every process, and you're essentially the right or left hand of that owner. And if you took that exact person and you threw him into another other millwork shop, or even if you're producing the same product, they're going to be out of their element, and they may never be that person again. And others can make that fluctuation. So that's where it is so difficult to find that perfect shop foreman. And then if we kind of want to get into another area, once you find them, holding on to them is pretty important as well.
Is it ever? Well, you've got to train them. You've got to support them. I mean, you can't.
Absolutely.
Hate to have anybody doing that's listening to the show is hire a foreman or a production manager and then not pay attention to them, not communicate with them.
And you hit the
way.
Yeah, the word you said, the perfect word was support. You don't have to give it, but you need to support them in decisions and being part of that whole process so they can make the best decisions. Like I said, that foreman has to be, his end goal is doing what's best for the company, but that owner is ultimately the one who really has to support them.
Yeah. Yeah. Complex question. I'm pretty sure we're going to be revisiting the foreman question again, and maybe Charlie will get you to weigh in on that next conversation again. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, find out more, or pick your brain on something, how would they find you?
Well, the easiest way is, they can look up our AMMT, or Architectural Manufacturing and Management Technology at Pitt State. You can go to our Pitt State website. You can Google search it. It's pretty easy to find. Charlie Phillips at Pitt State. We're out there. It's not, our friend Google makes everything so much easier. But yeah, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me personally. Go to our webpage, look at what our students are doing. I even have, I shouldn't say I give credit to my students. We have a Facebook, we have LinkedIn, we have Instagram, that our students keeping touch in this technical world, and showing off what our students are capable of.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, you're educating people is one of the most valuable things that we can do. Obviously, we always think this next generation is, there's no way they can make it, but people have said that about prior generations all the time. And I'm sure that because both of us are educators, we're always surprised at what we see coming up. I think this world's going to be just fine.
We just keep our head down and keep going, and don't get distracted by the disturbances on either side. And once again, have that goal in mind and keep persevering.
Yeah. Well, if people want to get in touch with Charlie, and the other way is it's going to be posted on the website. So every podcast episode is obviously, it's a video and it's an audio that people can download and listen to. If you're listening to this and you like the stuff that Charlie and I are talking about, please take a second and subscribe to the podcast. That helps other people understand that we have experts like Charlie talking really deeply about cool subjects like this. But you can see Charlie's contact information on the show notes page of the podcast. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, geez, I really do want to support my foreman a little bit more, my production manager a bit more, stay tuned to this podcast, because we're going to be talking more about things called a SWIFT assessment, which is putting lean manufacturing tools in place with your production manager, your foreman, so you can keep building the company the way you want it. And I'm going to keep having experts like Charlie on here, sharing knowledge and wisdom on the line. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Have a great day.
You do the same.
Thanks, Charlie.